So we actually started the farm in 2012. It's about 90 acres, and currently our enterprises are, we have 6 greenhouses that we do. The main focus is winter greens, but we also keep them full during the summer with a lot of summer crops. And we also do about 4 or 5 acres of outdoor vegetables. We raise pork, sheep for meat, lamb, cows for beef, and we do chickens for eggs and meat. And we also do grain as well, so like wheat for flour and some rye. And we raise a little bit of, we're starting to dabble with some grains to feed the pigs as well. And then, yeah, so the grass and the cows are, the lamb and the cows are grass-fed as well, so they're not eating any grain. We're trying to grow as much of the grass here as we can for the animals. They're 100% grass-fed and they're pasture-raised during the summer, pretty much from mid-April to about mid-November. We've split our vegetables up into a smaller, no-till, hand-powered like market garden. We call it market garden. It's just shy of an acre. And then the rest of our 3 or 4 acres of outdoor crops are done mostly with like tractor type power. Some of those are no-till and some of them are still reduced tillage. So you know, we'll go over more of that, like which crops we do which ways and the strategies we do to grow those with as little tillage as possible. But the big limiting factor to having the market garden or expanding the acres of the market garden is the labor. So it really takes the one person, Danny, who's the market garden manager, and his wife works part-time in the market garden as well. So it's 1.5 people full-time to take care of that 1 acre, whereas Danny does a little bit of time and I do a little bit of time on the 3 or 4 acres that we manage with like equipment and tractors and such, and we're able to handle that with really, it's like only a half or 3/4 of a full-time person for 3 or 4 times as much acreage. We really believe in mixing the animals into the rotation and into the crops and everything. So it's a form of fertility for us. It's also a way to manage a lot more acreage and grow a lot more food with minimal amount of labor again. So we have about 30 or 40 acres that's pasture and hayland. And I manage that with just myself, in addition to running the business and doing the outdoor vegetables. Our goal was to have this fairly self animal feed as we can, and hopefully just, you know, importing small nutrients here or there when we need them, seeds, things like that, and then just producing as much food as we can off of that land, while building the soil up at the same time and not degrading the soil or taking away from any resources on the farm, trying to build them back up. And that's again where the grass-based animals come in a lot to soil health and building it up. If anyone's familiar, you know, I won't go into it a lot, but rotational grazing, following the growth patterns of grass by grazing at certain times and allowing certain recovery periods of grass that way. And then also during the winter, when they're indoors, we can harvest that manure and bedding at the end of the year, compost it, and use it for fertility for our vegetables. And that's also kind of been our defining way to figure out the ratio between animals and livestock. With the amount of livestock we have on, you know, it's about as much as we can raise on 30 or 40 acres. And all that manure is gives us just enough to fertilize about 3 or 4 acres of vegetables. So you know, if we were to go to like 10 acres of vegetables, we'd have to import a lot more fertilizer to make up for that. So, you know, we've gone up and down in the animals and the livestock and the vegetables, trying to figure out the right ratio. And I think we're honing it. We're getting closer and closer to what a closed loop system, which is what we're trying for. So, yeah, so we also have a part-time person who works at our farm store, and you know, sometimes we usually have like 1 or 2 people working part-time or full-time for a couple of months during the summer. So it's about 5 or 6 people full-time and year-round. So yeah, another part of our focus at the farm was to feed people year-round. So that's why we built a lot of greenhouses to make sure we have the greens during the winter. we built some storage facilities for a lot of storage vegetables. Started getting into grain so we can offer flour and polenta and cornmeal during the winter months. And also the meat, that's really great to have in the middle of the winter, nice beef stew or something. So yeah, and then briefly too, where we distribute our food. So we have the farm store here, which is primarily a CSA pickup, but it's also open to the public. It's open year round, just 2 days a week, limited hours. Again, because we're trying to concentrate our labor resources on growing food, and you know, sometimes it's been difficult to get as much labor as we'd like here. So we have 2 greenhouses that are running north-south, you'll notice, and then the rest of them are running east-west. Summer crops, tomatoes, and so we really do tomatoes, basil, eggplant, and well, I guess cherry tomatoes, and cucumbers are in the 2 greenhouses that run north-south. So the advantage to that is you're getting more airflow through there. So for your tomatoes that have a lot of foliar diseases, you get more airflow during the summer, but you get less light because the light's coming in through the end wall. So it doesn't grow winter greens quite as well when you have north-south greenhouses. So the rest of the greenhouses all run east to west so that we're getting better winter green growth. So you're getting more sunlight during the winter and they grow a little bit more because that's really more important to us than summer growth for the greenhouses. We're actually kind of getting to the point where we have almost enough greenhouses to meet all our winter greens like demand, but we have more greenhouses than we have summer crops to grow in them, kind of. So we're just getting creative with what to grow in them during the summer. Like that's why we did some potatoes in that greenhouse. It seemed to work out, but yeah, we're just experimenting with different things to fill them all because you know, if they're all full of tomatoes, we can't sell that many tomatoes. We're doing a lot of compost in here. Out there, it's all no-till in the greenhouses, so it's wheelbarrows of compost, wheelbarrowing in or bucketing them into the greenhouse, pouring them down, raking it, sometimes broad forking. During the summer, that was like, you know, thick lush. You couldn't see through it. You know, you could walk 2 feet into it, you wouldn't be able to see. You get that nice coverage of mulch where no leaves or no weeds are going to grow up through. So this was kind of just more of a demo. You can imagine what it looked like if it was all green and lush.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah. We have gotten it to work pretty well now. It's kind of difficult because you really like only get to try it out once per season. It's like anything farming, you know, you got to do it 60 times to be an expert, so that you're not an expert until you retire. So do you know?
I used to know that. That's one of those things you don't use the fact it doesn't. I don't know, it's something like 10 miles an hour. It's like pretty fast.
Wow. Yeah, I've always been nervous to go too fast because, like, you know, it's always like, if I screw this up, then, you know, it's pretty much, you know, you really only get one shot a lot of times with the cover crops because come back in 2 weeks is too late or anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I usually probably only go like 3 or 4, maybe 5 miles an hour on it. But yeah, that's something to try to find out because yeah, you could cover a lot of ground if you could go a lot faster with it.
I have seen, I mean, Great Plains has a lot of videos with the monster.
One way, like, you know, I crimp, drive around back, and then go again, keep going the same direction if you do it twice. I've never tried to go the other way, but people told me it's bad news to try to crimp it the other way. It'll like make a mess of it. I was a little worried that once things are roller crimped, you wouldn't be able to go the other way with the no-till. But there's some crops out there we'll walk by on the way to the garlic, and it did seem to work okay. So I didn't have to like keep circling around and go the same direction each time I seeded. I was able to go, uphill or against the grain, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, I did remember something about the speed. I've heard people say that if you have a cover crop mixture in there with smaller seeds and you're driving faster, you get more settling of the different types of seeds just because there's more vibration.
This was our failed winter squash roller crimp experiment. But so actually it was onions, and we no-till drilled in the cover crop. And this spring we rolled it and planted in the winter squash, which unfortunately didn't work. But we did get a really nice, we had some horseweed, was the one weed problem we had. But other than that, the mulch did cover really well, and it was pretty nice tilth underneath. So what we decided to do this fall was I flail mowed all the horseweed off. There was still a fair bit of mulch you can see. And then I no-till drilled in triticale. And we're hopefully going to harvest the triticale for grain next season with the combine. So it seems to have worked out pretty well. And that forms like the basis, at least a base of mulch. We do try to come by and put some leaves on top later, but it's only half as many leaves as you would need if there was no cover crop. So those are the advantages to it. One, keeping the soil covered during the time between when we harvested the sweet potatoes and when we're going to plant the garlic, because you can see, this is getting exposed to rain, the beds that don't have any cover crop. We're getting, it's pulling a little nitrogen, even hopefully fixating a little nitrogen with the peas. So it's keeping our nutrients from leaching out during that time. And then also you're getting some free mulch without having to put the mulch there or buy the mulch or wherever you get your mulch.
Doing here is like thinking really specifically about the timing of the planting of the cover crop, what the soil needs, what the following crop needs, what equipment he has to plant it with, how he's going to terminate it, and then how he's going to plant something into that same land afterwards. And I feel like often people are like, what's the best cover crop mixture? And it's like, there's no answer to that because it's so complicated. So what this handout is trying to do is sort of talk about all of the things that you have to consider to make it work. And I think that like for most people, they find that like just trying a bunch of different things and taking notes is the way you get your best option, because it so much depends on your soil type and your season and how much water you have. And one thing I've seen, so I'm the commercial sales rep for the Northeast for Johnny, so I work with farmers in Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. Your soil health goals are, I would say primarily putting carbon in the soil because that's your source of organic matter. It also is often your mulch. Your goal could be anything. It doesn't have to be just increasing soil organic matter. You have to think like, what do I really need in this place and when do I need it? So starting by really defining that, because that means in some fields you're gonna focus more on the production to fertility. So you also have to, you've been hearing Chuck talk a lot about putting compost down before a cover crop, and that all goes into the following vegetable crop. So it's all being cycled there, but there are definitely times when you're going to have to fertilize your cover crop. From the research that I looked at as a grad student, planting things like peas and forage radish and vetch, after the third week of September or so is pretty much not cost effective. You're kind of throwing your money away. So there might be a reason to do it, and maybe it's important to you for other reasons, but in terms of really getting the bang for your buck in terms of nitrogen fixation, you have to put down a lot of peas in terms of pounds per acre and inoculate it, and it might just not be worth it unless you can really get it in on time. So like basically anything other than winter rye, I would highly recommend that you get in before the 3rd week of September, unless you can do something more creative, like plant it in your walkways, or plant it on the outer edges of a crop that you're going to harvest later. Sometimes people can cut the tops off their beets and sort of wiggle some rows of oats in between those beet rows. So if you can't get it in early, you either have to get creative or have more land. And I guess the next part of this little cycle here is thinking about the vegetable production. And the most interesting thing I've seen people do with no-till systems is to think really carefully about the architecture of their cover crop, the way it decomposes, and what they want to follow that cover crop with. So there's some people who are thinking really carefully about, okay, well, if I plant a radish cover crop that decomposes really quickly in the spring, that's pretty well decomposed by April, and that means you can direct seed spinach or baby leaf brassicas in there in the spring and actually have a beautiful seed bed. So thinking, sort of lining up really carefully, like what your cover crop is with what you want to follow it with. So one of the things, people grow a ton of winter rye and rye vetch mixtures in New England. But rye is the worst. It's so hard to work with. It's hard to kill. It can be really stemmy. It can be really hard to it can be hard to transplant into, let alone seed into. And Chuck described that problem with getting transplants in and the stem sort of getting pushed down into the soil. And just terminating it when at the right time can be really hard. The power of having those perennial grass producing areas of your farm and being able to just move that to where you need it year to year is brilliant and time saving and money saving, and provides a lot of fodder for your soil bacteria as they slowly break it down over time. And a lot of that, you can use it for more than one crop. It stays in place, it persists, and it shrinks down over time, but it's pretty solid. You can do all kinds of things in there. And I think it's really interesting to think about like using mixtures of grasses and clovers for those transferred mulches, or only really carbonaceous grasses. And I think there's like different strategies for different systems depending on how fast you want it to break down. If you're really in it for the weed suppression, or if you want it also for nutrient supply for your following vegetable crop. And right now it's the kind of thing where I feel like people are starting to do more and more of it, and I think that people are going to start to come up with like really clever ideas that we're all going to catch on to, but it's still in that experimental phase, and a lot of that has to end up being sort of manual because we don't have there's not like a market for that equipment yet. But as that market is developed, as people are doing more no-till production, I think that we'll see a lot more tools that'll help make it manageable to do. You only get like 50% nutrient release from those cover crop mixtures after 6 weeks or so. So like if you have like a fairly well balanced, like say a pea and oat cover crop that's winter killed, the peak release for that is often sort of in mid-June. Of course, that depends on if it's had rain or irrigation. If it's really dry, it'll be later than that because those bacteria need water to break it down.